Alright, hello once again, Jeff Scott of Rankin Technical College. I've been going through a series of video presentations I'm creating based off the two books for the Rankin Technical College AWD, or Application and Web Development 1000 Web Development Technologies class. So far I've covered all 20 chapters of Muroc's HTML5 and CSS3 4th edition, and now I'm into the second book, another Muroc text, Muroc's JavaScript and jQuery 3rd edition. And so far I've only done Chapter 1, Introduction to Web Development. So it's time to get into it. As it says, Chapter 2 is getting started with JavaScript. So, as has been my policy, I don't really want to sit there and read things to you. I also want to mention that if you happen to be watching this before the class has even started, we're going to go over this stuff in a ton of detail. So the first time you go through anything, with a lot of people, a lot of time, including myself, it may not totally make sense right away, and don't let that bother you. All right? So we'll talk about two ways to include JavaScript in the head of an HTML document, how you can include it in the body, some of the things about JavaScript syntax-wise, case sensitivity, semicolons, white space, JavaScript identifiers, which are basically things you create, how to write comments in JavaScript, the 3 primitive data types, yeah, that's it in JavaScript, number, string, and Boolean, how we work with those different data types, arithmetic expressions, order of precedence, how you can override with parens, how you can use the plus sign both for string concatenation and addition, a little bit on methods and properties. All right, but again, that's going to come much later in the text. And things like the alert, the prompt, parse in, parse float, write and write line. So, as it says right there, the script element has 2 different attributes for it. Now, I want to show you this, because typically, let's suppose for a second that I wanted to add a JavaScript file that was just called script.css. We'll just keep it real simple. All right, then I do something like this. I'd say script source equals, and a lot of times it'll be in its own directory called JS. So JS-script.js. All right, but you can also, at least occasionally, you'll see type equals text / JavaScript. Now, that line, or that part of it, that attribute and value, used to be required, and that was pretty much what's referred to as the MIME type. And you had to do that to let the system know that you were working with JavaScript. But it's more or less become the de facto standard, so you really don't need this. The other thing that you need, though, when you add a script tag is an ending script tag. All right, so you must have an ending tag with this. So in the example that they give here, there's a script that's going to load. You put that into the head section. It's going to load an external JavaScript file called calculateMPG.js. Should make sense. So rather than doing that, if you want to, you can embed JavaScript directly into the head section. Do you understand the correlation here? In other words, we talked about CSS, and we talked about inline CSS that you put right into an element. We talked about internal CSS, which you put in the head section. We talked about external CSS, which you put in its own file. Now for JavaScript, we've talked about external CSS, which you put in an external file, internal CSS, which you put in the head section, and sooner or later, we're going to see in here, all right, sooner or later, we're going to see inline, pretty much inline JavaScript. All right? So again, if it doesn't totally make sense, really and truly, don't let it bother you right now. So external JavaScript file means, again, it is another file that you put the JavaScript in. That's considered a really good idea, just like putting your external CSS in its own file is a good idea. You can go and Google separation of concerns, but the idea is an HTML file should hold just web page content and references to external JavaScript and or CSS files. CSS file should hold only CSS, which is going to work with the aesthetics of a page. JavaScript external file should hold only JavaScript. Okay? All right, so here's JavaScript right in the body and the result. Now, notice there's a no script element. It is possible there are many, I don't know if it's many, but there are people who have been told over time, hey, turn off JavaScript. It's evil. You don't want JavaScript in on your machine. I don't know why people would say that, but just in case you're worried about people having JavaScript turned off, you can use a no script tag. All right. So for instance, in here, what you're saying is I want to copyright, and okay, so I want the copyright symbol. I want you to go out and grab the current date and grab the current year. But if you don't have JavaScript active, if it's not turned on, then just set it to 2017. What's the difference? The difference is over time, this is going to change. So if it was December 31st of 2017, this would still say 2017, so would this. The next day, this would now say 2018. That would still say 2017. All right. This is how you oftentimes see no script tags in a document. That is, at the beginning of your HTML, you put a no script tag in there as it says, to get the most out of this website, please enable JavaScript. Okay. So here's some JavaScript code. We looked at this a little bit, I believe, in the last lesson. All right. And do I expect it to make sense? Not at all. But we're creating what's called an anonymous function here. It's anonymous because it doesn't have a name. All right. And we're assigning the results of this function right to a variable called join list. This says that somewhere I've got a text box named email address 1 and a text box named email address 2. You may remember from the last chapter, I showed you how that $ can be used as an alias for document.getElementById. That's what we're doing here. This says grab the value of the element in the text box called email address 1 and stick it into a local variable called email address 1. Do the same thing with a text box that's named email address 2. Grab its value and stick it in a local variable email address 2. Then do some simple validation. If the first email address is blank or empty, say email address is required. If the second one is blank or empty, say the second one is required. If the two do not equal one another, maybe I put hello in the first one and hello 1, 2, 3 in the second one, then say second email entry must equal the first entry. Then finally do the same check on first name, and if that's blank, say first name is required. If all of those tests fail, if the if fails, the else if fails, the else if fails, and the else if fails, that means you put a value in for email address 1, you entered the same value in for email address 2, and you entered something into the name field. So if all that is true, submit the form. All right. Some overall general rules about JavaScript. JavaScript is case sensitive. So if you create your own routine that's called hello with a capital H, and then you refer to that routine later as hello with a lowercase h, you're not talking about the same one as far as Java is concerned. Now, the second bullet there should read, each JavaScript statement should end with a colon. All right? I've told this story before to my classes, but years ago, I had a friend who was in a band, and he played guitar in the band. He was a fairly good guitarist. And his name is Scott. And I asked him once, I said, Scott, have you ever been up on stage and literally just had a string break? He's like, yeah, it's a pain, etc. I said, oh, if you're in the middle of a song, what do? He said, you turn the amp up a little, you play around it, you play another string, or you do whatever, but you make do. All right, so why am I telling you that? Well, if you're playing in a hard rock band and a string breaks, you can probably get around it pretty well. If you're playing on a stage by yourself with an acoustic guitar and that same string breaks, that might be more or less catastrophic. So why am I telling you this? Because with the way that JavaScript works is it kind of works the way like you're playing an electric guitar. If you forget to put a semicolon in, 99 times out of 100, JavaScript will act as though you did anyway. All right. JavaScript ignores white space within statements, so not within strings, not within single or double quotes, but when you're writing code, if you're a little anal like I can be, and you really like to line stuff up, there's no problem in doing that. All right. So if you want, you can split things over multiple lines. You'll see examples of this. All right. But there are certain times you shouldn't. Again, you will see this. An identifier is something you create. It's the name of a variable that you create. It's the name of a function that you create. It's the name of a class that you create, etc. All right? These identifiers that you create can only contain letters, numbers, the underscore, and the dollar sign. And you know what? If you want to be the best off you can be, have them only contain letters. They cannot start with a number. Again, they are case sensitive. They can be as long as you want them or need them to be. They can't be the same thing as reserved words, which we'll look at in a bit. And there are certain global properties and methods you should not use as identifiers. So here's some valid identifiers. Don't do this with the index. I would recommend not even don't use the dollar sign, don't even use the underscore. All right? Instead, use camel casing. That's, don't put tax underscore rate, put tax, and then when you start a new word, capitalize the first letter in that word. So if this was tax rate hello, the T in tax, or all the letters in tax, would be lowercase. The R in rate would be uppercase, and the ATE would be lowercase. And the H in hello would be uppercase, and the rest would be lowercase. These are recommendations. You should use meaningful names. You should be consistent. In other words, don't mix camel casing and underscore. And again, I'd recommend using camel casing. And people ask me, why do you recommend camel casing if you can use underscores? Because virtually every language that I know allows camel casing. Not every language that I know allows underscores. All right? So here are comments. If you start a comment with a slash star and you end it with a star slash, it's referred to as a multi-line comment because you can make it as long as you want to or need to make it. If you put it on a line of code, // everything to the right of that second / for the rest of the line is a comment. So it is basically ignored by the compiler. My litmus test for when, if you have to ask yourself, do I need a comment here? You probably do. You can use comments to comment out code. So if something isn't working, you can comment it out, bring it back in, or uncomment a line by a line, etc. You shouldn't use comments unnecessarily. I always mention the story that years ago I had a student who thought they had to comment virtually every line. And they on a blank line of their program, they had a comment that said, this is a blank line. I circle it in red and said, no, it's not, because you had a comment in there. All right. A JavaScript statement is typically something that ends with a semicolon, or should. White space, hitting the space bar, hitting the tab key, hitting the enter key. Identifier, again, those are names you come up with for variables, functions, classes, methods, etc. Camel casing is when the first word is all in lowercase. Then after that, if you run words together, the first letter in the next word and all preceding words is uppercase, and everything else is lowercase. Comments, again, single line comments are // and everything to the right of that becomes a comment. And multi-line comments start with /* and end with //. You can use comments to comment out code. All right. JavaScript has 3 primitive data types: number, string, and Boolean. So number handles both integer or whole number and decimal, or numbers that can have a decimal place in there. JavaScript can also store infinity and negative infinity. If you try to divide by 0 in JavaScript, you typically get an answer of infinity. Strings can be in single quotes or double quotes, but you can't mix. You can't start it with a double quote and end it with a single, or vice versa. You must start with a double, end with a double, or start with a single, end with a single. I recommend, when you can, using doubles, because in most other programming languages, strings, what you use for delimiters or bookends, must be double quotes. An empty string is a string with no characters. So it's double quote, or single quote, single quote. Boolean variables are variables that only have the values of true and false. You typically use them in conditional statements. When you create variables in JavaScript, you should always start with the word var. Now this is a variable declaration right here, var counter. This is a variable initialization, counter equal 1. You can combine those together to say var counter equal 1, which typically is what you're going to do. All right? So variables are basically, it's a memory location whose value may change or vary during a program. Declaring a variable is var followed by the variable name. Assignment statement is taking something on the right and assigning it to something on the left. The assignment operator is the equal sign. If I say age equal 21, 21 is a literal value. If I say first name equals double quote Jeff, double quote, all right, that's a string literal. If I say var, that should have been var first name equals double quote Jeff, double quote. And if I say var age equals 62, that's a numeric literal. Here are the JavaScript arithmetic operators. Most people have no problem with addition and subtraction. Multiplication is used with an asterisk. Division with a // Modulus, which is the remainder operator, used often if you want to find things like minutes and hours, dollars and cents, etc. Plus plus adds 1, minus minus subtracts 1. There is an order of precedence to this. You can always override that order of precedence through the use of parentheses. All right, to give you some code here, here's some code that would calculate sales tax. Here's some more code that will do the perimeter of a rectangle. Again, when we get to that point, you will write JavaScript programs. We will incorporate JavaScript into our website that we create. JavaScript has shortcut operators. 3 of the 6 are shown here. Okay, so if I say var subtotal equals 74.95, then if I say subtotal plus equal 20, this line right here is a shortcut for saying subtotal equals subtotal plus 20. There's plus equals, which means typically it's called add and assign. There's minus equals for subtract and assign. Times equals for multiply and assign. Divide equals for divide and assign. And modulo equals, all right, for remainder and assign. You can increment variables in many, at least in, well, it says 3 ways to increment a variable by 1, and they're all correct. This way, and this way. There's actually 4, because not only can you say counter plus plus, you can say plus plus counter. All right? Not everything you do in JavaScript math, like in other math, is going to be exact. So if I say x equal y plus z, that's an arithmetic expression. The operators would be x, y, and z. The operands, if I say x equal y plus z, are the equal sign and the plus. If I say x equal y times z plus a, the multiplication comes first in the order of precedence, unless I use parentheses. The compound were the plus equal, minus equal, times equal, divide equal, and modulo equal operators. When you work with strings, you can use a plus sign to add two strings together, and they show you examples of that here. You can also use the plus equal on strings, and it does concatenation as opposed to addition. And here's an example. JavaScript, like most programming languages, supports escape sequences. The ones you will use the most often are the first one that is shown right here, \n for a new line, and \t for tab. You can again concatenate or join strings together with the plus sign or the plus equals. String expressions are expressions within single or double quotes. And escape sequences, the ones again you'll use most often, are \n and \t. All right. Common methods of the window object. An alert gives you a message box. A prompt gives you an input box. Print allows you to print something. And again, I'm being unbelievably simplistic here. So here's an example of a prompt. This is a test of the prompt method 100. This is a test of the prompt method. That's your text. 100, that is your default value. Okay. Again, if this doesn't all make sense, really and truly, don't let it bother you. You can work with what's called the window object and put stuff on the screen. Anytime you put something into a dialog box like this, even though it says 100, it's not the number 100, because anything you put into a dialog box becomes a string. So it is the string double quote 100 double quote or single quote 100 single quote. If you want to convert that into a number, there's parse int to convert it into a whole number, parse float to convert it into a floating point number. If you try doing something like that and it doesn't work, you get NaN return. That's not a number. Some examples, more examples. The document object, you can use the write method or the write line method if you so desire to write information right to a web page. All right, and they've got some examples right here. And that's what you get. All right, again, we're going to go through a whole section on objects later, but an object basically is something that holds both methods, which are behaviors, and properties, which are attributes or values. All right, you can call a method, you can pass things to a method, those are parameters. You can work with the window object, the global object, the dot operator is typically how you call a method, and there's a document object. Here's some examples. So if you of a simple JavaScript program, enter miles driven 273, enter gallons used 12.5, you do the math, and you get the answer. They give you the HTML for this, and then they give you a quick little, another JavaScript program with test scores. You add the 3 up, divide by 3, and you get this. And then they give you the HTML and the JavaScript for that as well. All right. So that is it for Chapter 2. When I come back, I will be going into Chapter 3, which is the essential JavaScript statements. I'll be back with that shortly.